With the jump from Galaxy Z Flip 4 to Flip 5, Samsung gives us a flat folding hinge, a cheeky performance upgrade, and apps on the cover screen. That's it for now. Be sure to subscribe for more foldable coverage. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, it's not quite that simple, but the choice between the new Flip 5 and the previous Flip 4 can pretty much be summed up in that thesis sentence. Samsung's not rocking the boat too much here, but the Flip 5 is, for my money, by far the most interesting of the Galaxy foldables this year, and that pretty much boils down to two big upgrades. You can do a whole lot more on the cover screen this year, and that might be the single biggest reason to upgrade from Flip 4 to Flip 5, because as I've seen from my recent time with the Moto Razr Plus, this is a feature that changes the way you use a foldable. Besides which, in what seems like a long overdue aesthetic improvement, the wedge-shaped hinge gap when the flip is closed has been banished to the trash fire of smartphone history. But before we get too much into either of those two tentpole features, let's back off and look at the spec sheets and see how these two measure up on paper. There are mostly generational upgrades to be seen here, starting with the jump up to a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 from the previous 8 Plus Gen 1. There's the same 8 gigs of RAM, but storage now starts at 256 gigs, making things a little roomier than the Flip 4's 128. Battery and charging specs remain the same in both devices, a 3700 mAh cell and up to 25 watts over a wire plus Qi wireless. However, remember the 8 Gen 2 is more efficient than its predecessor, so chances are you'll get some small amount of extra mileage out of the Flip 5 versus the Flip 4. Still, a modest upgrade that probably isn't going to see the Flip challenging any of the big boy slab phones with much larger battery capacities. Okay, so back to the fun stuff. If you're a familiar flip phone fan, your attention may be drawn to the upgraded hinge. Now previously, Samsung has managed to trim down some of this space between the two sides of this phone when it's folded flat, but never managed to make a fully flat folding foldable until now. The Flip 5 uses a water droplet hinge like the Moto Razr Plus and Oppo's N2 series. That's as opposed to the traditional gappy hinge of the Flip 4. The new hinge allows the Flip to take up less space in a bag or pocket, and makes the overall profile of this foldable just seem sharper and more visually clean. It's clearly the platonic ideal design of this form factor that it was always supposed to have. However, there is one slight but notable trade-off. Once again, it's something that you may only notice if you have a Flip 4 to compare side by side, but the hinge is at certain angles just a little looser in the Flip 5 than the Flip 4. Now you can still keep it open at any angle between 0 and 180 degrees, and all your favourite flex mode tricks will continue to work just great. But it's just a little looser in that middle sort of configuration, maybe around the 45-degree mark or so. If that's a trade-off necessary for the water droplet hinge, I will gladly take it. And the hinge overall is much tighter than the competition from either Oppo or Motorola. Both rivals have what could be described as floppy hinges at certain angles. That's much less of an issue with Samsung. In terms of what that means for the screen crease in the Flip 5, well, it's still there and somewhat noticeable, maybe a tiny bit less so than last year. Overall though, I wouldn't say it's appreciably better or worse than the Flip 4's. Honestly, if you use a foldable like this day to day, this kinda blends into the background anyway. Another physical difference that you might notice is the move from frosted glass in the Flip 4 to glossy in the Flip 5. Mostly a matter of taste there, though I found the glossy finish to be just a little easier to grip onto. And you've got a new palette of pastel hues to choose from with the newer device: graphite, cream, lavender and mint, not a million miles away from the old Flip 4 colours there. So far so cosmetic, but the one upgrade that might actually revolutionise how you use it day to day is the Flip 5's significantly retooled cover screen. This is a whopping 278% larger than the Flip 4's in terms of screen area, now measuring in at 3.4 inches diagonally in a more squarish aspect ratio. And as you'd expect, the software going along with this larger outer display has been overhauled too. The standard way to interact with your phone via the cover screen is this widget deck, which has evolved from the more limited widget carousel of the Flip 4. These live widgets are active all the time and let you do everything from quickly checking the weather, viewing exercise stats, and setting alarms and timers. Front and center is the Rolodex of creative clock widgets with some really useful complications as well, and there's a much larger notification panel available by swiping right. Replying to messages is obviously much easier on this larger panel too. With the Flip 4, you're much more limited in your ability to respond without opening the phone. The whole interface still feels a little smartwatch-like in that it is so focused on these widgets, but this also makes it more approachable and is less confusing than having a whole separate set of home screens like Samsung's larger foldables. If you're a power user though, what you'll be most excited about is the ability to run full Android apps on this larger outer display. This was technically possible on the Flip 4 with the assistance of Samsung's Good Lock tool, but now it's much more of a user-facing feature. Out of the box, there are just a handful of supported apps that'll appear in this app launcher panel here, and these work well enough considering the limitations and the aspect ratio on offer. I could definitely imagine keeping a Google Maps route open on here, or quickly responding to a message, or even taking in a cheeky YouTube video. Having used the Razer Plus recently, I found it is surprising just how much you can get done on a larger outer screen like this. Approved apps can be added to this widget from within the Samsung Labs portion of the settings menu, which should tell you that even out of the gate, this is considered to be a little bit of an experimental feature. If you don't want to be limited to just Samsung approved apps on your cover screen, you will once again be able to open it up to anything and everything with the help of good old Good Lock. The Good Lock update to enable this should be rolled out around the time the Flip 5 goes on sale. By comparison, the Flip 4's cover screen interface, though not exactly bad considering its tiny dimensions, is a much more limited experience. Obviously, full screen apps, should you choose to enable them via Good Lock, are gonna feel pretty claustrophobic. And even things like shooting selfies requires a lot of squinting and hoping for the best. It's designed to be much more of a glanceable panel where you maybe do one thing, address one task, rather than being in a state of actively using an app like you can do with the Flip 5. On the software side, fan-favorite features like Flex Mode make a return, and both models offer pretty much an identical experience on One UI 5.1 or 5.1.1. Samsung's excellent multitasking makes a return, and you'll also get my personal favorite light performance profile for boosting battery life. One big difference here software-wise is the extra year of OS and security updates that the Flip 5 will get compared to the Flip 4, bringing it up to Android 17 in 2027. Otherwise, most of what's new here is to be found in the widget carousel for that new outer screen, which obviously is absent on the Flip 4. The other perhaps slightly surprising thing to mention about that larger cover screen is its impact on battery life. Because if there's more you can do without opening up and using that larger, power-hungry 120Hz 6.7-inch main display, your battery is gonna thank you, especially since the outer screen here is a less demanding 60Hz panel. So even outside of any of the internal hardware being more efficient, you may just find the outer screen helps you get more out of the battery that's already there. You might save juice on the Flip 5 versus Flip 4 just because you end up opening it up less often. Next, the camera setup, once again 12MP wide and ultra wide and a 10MP in-screen selfie in both. And honestly, there's very little to talk about here because both phones use identical hardware according to the specs we have. It's possible the Flip may boast some imaging improvements thanks to its upgraded chip and ISP. Either way, the Flip 4 already had the best camera in a clamshell, so this isn't necessarily an area in need of a hardware refresh. The most notable part of the camera that has changed is actually the selfie shooting experience. Because the outer display is so much more expansive and the aspect ratio closer to that of your sensor, you get a much better idea of who or what is in frame. That's a huge upgrade if you take a lot of selfies, obviously. If you're mainly shooting from behind the camera, then yeah, very little to separate these two. So Fold 4 to Fold 5 is a mix of revolutionary and evolutionary changes. It's revolutionary because it feels like the biggest upgrade to the cover screen yet, one that actually significantly changes how you think about using a clamshell foldable. And this in turn affects how you do things like shooting selfies and using apps. But elsewhere, this feels incredibly iterative. The hand feels familiar. The two chunks that make up these phones feel largely identical, even if said chunks are now able to fold completely flat. Even the color palette is very familiar. I think if you're cross-shopping these two, the Flip 5 is a pretty clear winner, at least based on my initial impressions. Even with as serious a discount as we've seen from the Flip 4 in recent months, I'd still stump up the extra cash for the newer Flip. That's true even with the more expensive UK price this year of $1049. The larger cover screen is that big of a deal, even if Samsung does still seem to be coasting a little bit in some other areas. If you have a Flip 4 you're perfectly happy with, it's a tougher call, but I'd still be very tempted depending on trade-in prices just because of how central that cover screen is to everything this phone does. The cries that Samsung is still coasting when it comes to foldables are sure to continue, not least because the Fold series has gotten arguably its most boring upgrade this year, even in the face of a lot of serious competition from Google and the Chinese brands. But when it comes to clamshells, Samsung is still king, and the Flip 5's potent combination of camera prowess, a flat folding form factor, and an excellent exterior display is more than enough to retain the crown, and tempt folks away from its cheaper predecessor. That's it for now. Be sure to subscribe for more foldable coverage like this, we really appreciate it. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.